School Hangout on Wednesday. Today we're going to talk with the genius, Gavin Horn. He's from the Illinois Fire Institute of Illinois, and he's been doing some great work out there. This is really a show where I think I'm going to be a little enlightened, PJ, because I'll be doing a lot of listening and not a lot of talking, because this cancer research is so important. It not only affects firefighters, but it affects our families in the firehouse and out of the firehouse. I'm going to kick it to the boss, Bobby Halton, and we'll start it off from there. So go ahead, Chief.
Hi, Frank. Thank you for having me on your show today, and I appreciate it. I wanted to just do a quick shout-out about FDIC, where Frank and PJ and Gavin are all presenting, and Henry, if he joins us, Henry's running a little bit late, are all presenting, so that's absolutely fantastic. When is your class? You guys got a workshop, right? PJ, Frank, you guys both have workshops?
Yeah, Chief, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Yeah, I'm teaching on Monday with Battalion Chief Jim Duffy, good friend of ours. We're teaching all day. We actually have 2 workshops back-to-back, 2 4-hour workshops. And then I think, Frank, when are you on? You're on Monday as well, right?
I'm teaching Monday. It'll be my first workshop at FDIC. I'm teaching tactical leadership, applying science while still being aggressive. And I hope that if you're listening, you can come out. My promise at FDIC is always the same every year. You won't learn anything, but I'll entertain you, and you'll take something away from it.
Well, and you know, if you do want to come out, you can still register. We have 3 weeks of registration still open for another 3 weeks, and we still have many classes still open. We have sold out about 13 of the hands-on training classes have sold out at this point, but there's still some seats left in the NIST-UL live fire experiments class, where Gavin is going to be participating along with a good friend of ours, Denise Smith from Skidmore College, and they're going to be talking about some of the results they're going to be capturing during the experiments and then how that affects us in terms of firefighting. What's unique about that particular class, the NIST-UL live fire experiment class, is that in the morning we're going to attempt to do as many as 4 live fire experiments where we're going to look at different hypotheses. Everything from water application, flow paths, ventilation, door open, door closed, a wide variety of potential scenarios that I know Steve and Dan and I and the teams were all out in Indiana last week looking at our facility, our property that we're going to burn, this old farmhouse. So you can that's part of it, but the part of it, and Gavin's going to get into it later, we're going to in much more depth today, we're going to talk about what he'll be doing out there at the NIST-UL burns and why it's important. But what's cool about it is we'll do the burns in the morning, we're going to come back to the convention center, and you're going to have 11 of the greatest fire service minds that there are today, including Denise and Gavin, people like John Cirillo, George Healy, Eddie Harton, Derek Alconis, the list goes on and on and on, who've been involved with these studies since the beginning in the classroom, where we're going to take the data from those particular burns and analyze it. We're going to talk about, I won't be in there much, I'll be in and out, I'll just come in and say hello, I've got other duties to attend to, but many of my fellow panel members are going to come popping in and out, but those 11 men and women will be with you the entire time who've been participating. They'll be out with you at the actual burns, watching the burns with you and discussing it. So it's going to be just phenomenal. Also, we still have a couple of slots, I think 3 or 4 slots left open in the collapse class. We found a great property this year to collapse, and we're going to be collapsing an entire home. There are some spots left open in the rescue class, which I think a lot of people don't understand. It's rescue operations for the fire ground, but it doesn't have to be squad or rescue company oriented. I mean, just the common skills for anybody to do. And the bailout class still has a few spots open, which I'm really surprised. Jason Hubelman, one of the greatest instructors, I think, coming up in the fire service today, and an absolutely outstanding gentleman, one of the most beautiful people you could ever want to meet, has put together a tremendous team. And they're really suburban firefighters and rural firefighters who are going to be showing how important it is in every environment that we understand how to do bailouts. They've got a great program they put together, and then we're bringing back the Dave McGrail doing standpipe, and there's still some slots left open in Dave's class. And if you've ever taken a class from Chief McGrail, you learn more in a half hour from Chief McGrail than you will from most people in 2 days. I mean, just a brilliant man, outstanding firefighter, tremendous gentleman, and he's bringing back a world-class team. So there's still room open in the standpipe class and the bailout class. So look into that. And then also the workshops, there's room left in the workshops. So if you want to take a workshop one day and a hands-on the other day, and that's just the pre-conference. When Wednesday opens up, we got the main program where Steve Kerber from UL will be doing the opening keynote, and then we'll go into the other speakers and lifetime achievement with Willie Peters and some other great conversation. I'll be giving a brief talk in the morning, and then on Thursday we've got some unique stuff. We'll be having a keynote by Sean DeCrane, who is absolutely just one of the most incredible firefighters you ever want to meet, and Sean will be doing a keynote, followed by Governor Mike Pence, who's going to sign a bill establishing Indiana's first fire training facility for the state of Indiana. This is the first state fire training facility. The governor's going to sign the bill on the stage at FDIC, and he's going to be followed by Admiral Scott Moore. And Admiral Moore was in charge of all, he's a 30-year SEAL, and he was in charge of all special naval warfare operations for the last 10 years. So you got this, and he's going to be talking about teamwork. So you got this lineup on Thursday that's unbelievable. The main program Thursday has more in it than most fire shows could ever hope to have in totality. And that's going to be followed on Wednesday by the classroom sessions that start. 208 or 209 classes are going to be offered Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And the exhibit floor is going to open up Thursday afternoon with about over 1,000 different exhibitors and vendors all the way through the Indiana event. So just an amazing thing. Stop, drop, rock, and roll. The NFFF stair climb, please sign up for that. The 5K fun run, the Fool's Bash, comedy night on Tuesday night with world-class comedians supporting the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. But that's what we're talking about today. So Tuesday when you get in, make sure you go onto the Cancer Support Network's comedy night. Unbelievable. All this is available at FDIC.com. Just go click on it. Special events, classes, register. I don't know why you'd be anywhere else. So thank you for allowing me to make a quick pitch. And now back to our hosts. Oh, and hashtag FEChat. Hashtag FEChat. Send Gavin your questions.
Chief, thanks for the great plug for FDIC. The only thing I want to add is some of the phenomenal people that you mentioned doing the UL and the NIST classes. A lot of people feel that it's just a scientist, but you and I know, and Frank knows, and Gavin knows, that just about everybody that you mentioned there, DeCrane, Kerber, George Healy, Sir John Cirillo, they're all street-credited fire service instructors that are still working the field. They're not just scientists. They're not just researchers. These are the guys that are still doing it in the street today or recently retired, and they're bringing the fire service and the science together. They're bringing all this research together.
Hey, well, let's be honest though. Let's come on. Let's be honest. There is at least one guy I know of whose credibility is very questionable, and I'm not sure at all why he's been involved. And the guys that I'm speaking about myself, so every now and then they do make a mistake. I'm not sure how I ever got involved with these guys. So there are some losers in the bunch.
Naturally.
You're the ringleader.
I'm comic relief.
I just wanted to throw that out there because I know there's still some of that underlying concern that we're just researchers and just scientists. I mean, we need to understand, or the fire service needs to understand that it's endorsed by fire service veterans who have done and are still doing it on the streets today, and we couldn't do it without the help of the researchers.
And Gavin knows it. These are real firefighters involved. Ray McCormick is on the upcoming panel. Aaron Fields is on the upcoming panel. For the love of Jehoshaphat's, we got the most involved people in the world on these panels. Steve's done an amazing job. He's just a brilliant guy. Sam Hiddle out of Wichita is coming up on the next panel. I mean, these are, we're the urchins of the fire service. These are the real grunts, and I got to tell you, and I know Gavin and well, you guys are probably too young also to remember this, but my generation, people always talk about having been at Woodstock. Okay, this is going to be like having been at Woodstock for the fire service. 3 years ago, when we first did Science in the Big Room, I said that people would be swearing that they were in that room today, and the room only held, I think, about 3,000. It was packed. And I bet you I've met 12,000 people who swore to me that they were in the room that day that I got up there. And I'm going to tell you right now, 400 lucky people are going to be able to participate in this hands-on class, the live fire experiment deal. But I'll guarantee you right now, in 5 years, you'll be able to count 4,000 of your closest friends who will all swear they were there. So 1 in 10 will be telling you the truth. But everybody's going to want to say they were there because this is cool stuff.
Yeah, I think
this is the fire service. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And I want to go to Gavin Horn, and I want him to give us a little bit about his background before we dove into this very important topic. And I think for our listeners out there, people do get scared, as PJ say, with scientists. But the fact is, all they're doing is asking the question, why? A lot of times they're not even telling you, this is what you have to do, this is the way you do it. They're answering the questions, why, so that we can digest it as the fire service and put out the training that our members need. So we need to open our minds. I think it was Ben Franklin who said, if everybody's thinking alike, then nobody's thinking. So with that, Gavin, if you could introduce yourself, and we appreciate what you're doing for the fire service and the fire service families.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's going to be tough to follow up that. I mean, I'm excited about FDIC just from Chief Halton's introduction here. That's outstanding. Can't wait to help out and be a part of all that. My name is Gavin Horn. I'm the Director of Research at the University of Illinois Fire Service Institute. We're the state training academy for Illinois by statute, but also by statute we have a research arm that's co-located right here. And I think one of the great things, just following up on the conversation we've had about the way that UL has been doing their research, and heard it time and time again, it's with the fire service, not just giving research to the fire service. They're doing the work with the firefighters from the very beginning and making it seamless, making it very transparent from the very beginning. And technology such as this is a great way to do it. You know, that firefighters can understand from the very beginning. We haven't collected any data yet on the study we're going to talk about now, but we want to get that information out so people can start that conversation. We don't need to wait to the very end of the study where it's been done for us to start to think about how we can couch this, how the firefighters can use it. So much in the same vein that UL has always done research with the fire service, we are the fire service. At the Illinois Fire Service Institute, we are a state training academy. And we're very unique in that our research, it doesn't matter if the solution comes from the College of Medicine, if it comes from engineering, if it comes from psychology, if it comes from culture research, we don't care. Our goal is to go out and find what are the issues that the fire service is dealing with, why are we getting hurt, what is killing the firefighters on the fire ground, why can't we do the job as efficiently, or what are ways we can improve the efficiency. And then we go to one of the great research campuses in the world, here at the University of Illinois, one of the top engineering colleges in the world, and we get a chance to talk to these real scientists. These are the real geniuses who then come in, and we've never had a problem interesting those individuals and working on the problems that we have in the fire service. So it's a really unique collaboration that we have. If I look just outside my window right now, we've got some of the most realistic live fire hands-on training props that are available. Collapse City, everything else that we do here, hands-on. Within 2 minutes, they can be in here in a clinical research setting. In fact, we did a study a few years ago where 2 minutes after they got done searching a room, we had them in here, and the firefighters could see their heart beating in front of their face with a cardiac ultrasound. So those are the types of research that we do here that really complements some of the work that NIST and UL have done for history. But again, we've been working this since the very beginning with the fire service, addressing the question specifically of interest to firefighters through the state and across the country.
Gavin, what are some of the benchmarks of the study that's underway right now?
Well, the current study that we've begun in September is titled Cardiovascular and Carcinogenic Risks in Modern Firefighting. So this is really the largest study that we've ever done here at IFSI, and we've been working with DHS, the Fire Prevention Safety Grant, for years. But this is one we're really excited about because it brings together all sorts of different areas. Our expertise at IFSI for decades, really, back when Denise Smith was a graduate student at the University of Illinois, is really understanding the physiological stress of firefighting. You know, how does it affect our core temperature? How does it affect our heart rate doing the job? How does different types of gear affect the difficulty in doing the job? How does different SCBA design and size affect? What about rehab? How are those things affect the human body? And then transitioning that into looking at some of the cardiovascular strain. As you're saying, we have some really clinical measures of changes in blood from the chemistry, changes in how the vessels or those arteries, how they stiffen and change due to the stresses of firefighting, and how the heart itself fatigues, how the cardiac fatigue due to the heart's a muscle, right? So it will fatigue just like any other muscle. and we can quantify those in some really high-end clinical measurements. So that's the work that we've done for a number of years. But it's always been in relatively controlled training environments that is typical in most training academies. Now you include some of the great work that Steve and Dan have done at NIST and UL, and they're really showing what the modern fire environment looks like. So what are some of the changing risks? What are some of the changing, and to me, one of the most important things I've seen from them is the changing timeline, right? The fires we know how fires burn, but what's changing now is the speed, the amount of time that we have, why we're getting into trouble in some cases, because we don't have that extra little reserve, in terms of how rapidly we go from venting a structure to it flashing over. That timeline is decreased so rapidly we can't make up for errors on the fire. But they've done an amazing job just characterizing everything as much as they possibly can in terms of what the fire ground looks like at this day and age and how tactics can affect that. So what we're doing here is marrying those two together, some of our clinical research with the UL research. Now, the other aspect of this is NIOSH. We were very fortunate about 3-4 years ago to work with Dr. Kenny Fent from NIOSH. When they were looking at characterizing other aspects of the fire ground as opposed to the temperature and the flows and the velocity of gases that move in and out of the buildings like UL is doing, they're looking at some of the carcinogens. Right? So they're interested in what are the volatile organic compounds, what are the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or VOCs and PAHs, because I can't say those words over and over again. But what are those things that are being produced by the fires? What gets on the gear? What gets through the gear and onto the skin of our firefighters? And then we're looking at it again, just like we want to see with the cardiovascular system. How does it affect the body? So in a study, small pilot study we ran with them years ago, we just looked at 15 Chicago firefighters that went through some very basic tasks and saw what got on the gear, through the gear, and then looked an hour and 3 hours out at what was metabolized. So what did we see in the breath and in the urine that actually got in and was systemic exposure for these firefighters.
Now, Gavin,
yes.
Do you think there's going to be a recommendation, excuse me, about how long after a fire firefighters should properly decon their gear and take a shower? Because that's up to debate right now, and I could actually, Bobby and I have talked about this before, but I could see us getting to the point where even live fire training, where you'd have showers on site to decon the gear properly and have everybody take a shower. Do you see us moving in that direction?
That's certainly a possibility, and what you're asking is exactly one of the outcomes that we're looking at from bringing all these things together. So what we're really looking at from an overarching perspective, a 5,000-foot view, is what does it take to put the firefighter back in service? Right? We know what we need to do to get the engine back in service. Right? So putting the tools back, cleaning them up, possibly replacing some things. What we don't know is what does it take to get the firefighter back in service so they're ready for the next firefight or the next medical call or the next public assist or auto extrication, whatever that is. There are some very good recommendations out there that, yeah, in terms of showering, in terms of using something like a baby wipe or skin wipe to clean up, deconning gear. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of great data that goes with it. I think some of them are common sense, but one of the aspects of this study is looking at that period after the fire. That's actually a very big part of what we're doing. We look at some gross on-scene decon. After our firefighters are in there, what happens? How effective is it if you go off and you brush the gear off? Can we remove a significant amount of carcinogens? What if you rinse it off, or rinse and brush? So that's an outcome that we're gonna have some data on that we can actually quantify, as well as looking at the wipes. You know, how effective is using some of those skin wipes at removing carcinogen, particularly from the neck, which is where we know from previous studies where we're having the highest exposure, even when we're wearing all of the gear.
Well, it's phenomenal the work that's being done and what you're doing and marrying it with the data from UL and NIST. But I think part of the problem is to break down a communication between today's firefighters on how it truly affects them. You know, it's like the elephant in the room. We all know that it's a concern for us and that firefighters have a higher risk of cancer. What I think they don't truly understand is what happens to them. what happens to their family. I have not been directly impacted by cancer, but I was cheated of an adult relationship with my father, who died 15 years ago from cancer. So I understand the family side of it. I understand of growing up with, I was a little bit older, but I'm still kind of young, so cheated of that, that adult relationship with my father, and him not being here for my daughter now, so there's that family aspect. I hate to put, the Chief Halton on the line here and kind of throw him under the bus a little bit, but he has some experiences with how it affects you personally, but also how it affects family. And I'm hoping that maybe, Chief, that you'd be willing to jump in here a little bit and give some of those firefighters that don't understand, what I've gone through losing my father to cancer. And I know that you have plenty of close friends and some experience with cancer as well, that maybe you can give some of that personal side of it as well.
Yeah, there's so many things that Gavin touched on, and P.J., thank you for that. And I've had my own experiences with cancer. My dad also passed away when I was a young man from cancer. And part of what I think is so critically important about the studies that we're doing now, and Gavin mentioned so many things. I mean, when we're talking about somebody's genetic makeup and predisposition to cancer, we always, in the past, kind of looked at the historical aspects of it. Now, with us being able to map the genome and look at the people's DNA, it's just a matter of time before they be able to help us identify people who may be more susceptible to certain toxins on the fire ground, as Gavin was talking about. We did the smoke characterization study about 5 or 7 years ago, and that was a landmark study. And it takes time. I mean, we need to be patient, but at the same time, we need to have a sense of urgency. I mean, Dr. Deborah Wallace, gave us In the Mouth of the Dragon, wrote about fire ground toxicity back in the 1990s. Went virtually ignored, as she was a lone voice in the wilderness. Well, now there's many voices, and it's a great thing. And on a personal level, cancer will change your entire life. Some for the worse, obviously, and some for the better, because it gives you a greater appreciation of life and what we're doing. And I think that I don't want the fire service, and I don't want people to miss the forest for the trees and some of the stuff that Gavin's talking about. Cancer's a piece of it. But when you talk about people's arteries constricting, when you talk about blood viscosity changing, when you talk about those types of things, and Gavin, I think you could probably talk to it better than I ever could. I'm clearly the dopiest guy on this particular hangout. But clearly, those things, when we talk about stroke and we talk about cerebral vascular accidents or even decision making, those are huge byproducts of those things happening to your body physiologically. I mean, if you're getting less oxygen transfer going through those membranes into your brain, if your heart is getting less stuff, if you have any pre-existing cardiovascular disease, Dr. Brown's study, I highly recommend folks take a look at Dr. Brown's study on the cardiovascular respiratory effects of structural firefighting that was published, I think Gavin could correct me, but I think it was 4 or 5 years ago through Indiana. Great study. And the other thing, and I don't want to throw out too many things to Gavin, but I want to pick his brain as best we can. I want to read a question that we got. Remember, here's my high-tech graphics. We spare no expense here at Fire Engineering. But remember, it's #FETalk, and our good friends at Wear Your Face Piece, which if you're not following Wear Your Face Piece on Twitter, please stop. Please start following Wear Your Face Piece on Twitter. These are some great people, good friends of mine, absolutely 100% the salt of the earth folks. Wear Your Face Piece on Twitter. They ask, and this I throw it out to PJ and Frank and Gavin, as far as the cancer threat, isn't the fuel load and the fuel load our biggest concern? And they're talking about, and I'll make a shameless plug before I turn it over to you guys. I'll make a shameless plug, as I often do. Go online, go to used books, and go get In the Mouth of the Dragon by Dr. Deborah Wallace. It's only available. It's not in any. It only was printed once. It was printed in 1990, and she talks a lot about off-gassing, quantitative decomposition, how when things break down, how they create these toxic gases, which is just what it is. We're never going to go back to horsehair and cotton. Trust me. Polymers it's just going to become a bigger part of our lives. So fighting those fires is going to become more important. So that's a great question, and if you guys wouldn't mind taking it, and if you have more questions, #FETalk, and we'll get your question online to Gavin Horn, who's one of the smartest, honest to God, one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet.
I wish that was true. I just get to work with a lot of really smart people like Denise and Steve and everything else. But if I could really quickly, I think you're exactly right. In terms of the fuel loads, we're not going to go back to horsehair and cotton. Wool maybe, but plastics are here and they're here to stay. And there's always, I should say, there's a very rapid evolution in the fuels that we have in our buildings. Whether plastics can be made cheaper or different additives so that they can survive longer, or even fire retardants, which is obviously a very big discussion going on right now. What are the values and how much is necessary to be effective? So that's constantly going to evolve, but we are always going to have to, we're going to have to expect to live with plastics for a very long time, at least within my fire service career. We're going to probably expect that to be the dominant fuel load in most of the buildings that we go to. So what we need to do is really think about how we can protect ourselves from that. And protecting isn't just a PPE thing. There's a lot of different ways that we protect ourselves from the plastic fire environment.
In the practical application of this, and Bobby hit it right on the head with the mouth of the dragon, I got real exposed to it when Chief Ted Jarbo from Montgomery County, Maryland, did an executive fire officer paper where they looked at 105, it's been a long time since I've seen it, it was 92, but I believe it was 102 or 105 autopsies and fire deaths, and the contributing causes to their death were acrolein, carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen chloride. And something that I like to do in my classes to put a practical element onto this is, it's great that we're metering for hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide now, but I'm still seeing SOPs out there throughout the country where it says, 9 parts per million of carbon monoxide is okay, or 35 using an OSHA time-weighted average. But the fact is, those chemicals are seldomly there ever by themselves. So if you have any meter reading, there's going to be a host of other nasty actors there. And one way I drive it home is I say, when you take off your mask at a fire, how many people here in the class have had their eyes water? And everybody puts their hands up. Well, carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide, it's not one of the signs and symptoms. It doesn't make your eyes water. So at that point right there, that should be the light bulb to say, I am effectively poisoning myself. And I like to say, the air on your back, it's the only thing the government hasn't figured out how to tax yet. We all need to do a better job of wearing our air, myself included. And the fact is, if it's just on your back and you're not breathing air, the only thing you're doing is hurting your back. So it's good practice and great training to make sure that you wear your mask. And for the officers out there, it's one thing when you think you're that salty firefighter who took off your mask, but now you have people looking to you as the boss. And once you take off your mask, I don't care how much the kids care about science, they're taking it off too. We manage stock, we lead people, and I think the officers need to take responsibility for their crews and say, hey, I need to lead by example. I need to breathe air, and I need to make sure that my crew, looking at what Gavin Horn and other great people are doing across the country here, that, hey, how do we get ourselves back in service?
And I think you're absolutely right, Frank. It starts, it starts ahead of time doing stuff like this, educational pieces. It rolls over to the fire ground to manage your air and making sure you wear your mask. But then the officers also have to remember when you get back to the firehouse, they're not supposed to disappear to their office, do their paperwork, and have their cup of coffee. That's the point where they really need to be making sure that they're deconning themselves. They're making sure their crews are taking a shower. They're getting their gear rotated out if they have the opportunity to have a second set of gear, get their gear washed, get their hood washed, their gloves, and also the pieces that some forget is your helmet liner and your helmet itself. You know what I mean? All those pieces of fabric and PP that touch our skin, we have the opportunity to absorb the carcinogens that are within those pieces. So, when was the last time you truly deconned your helmet liner? You might want to answer that right now, but you know what I mean? If you think about those pieces, every time you put your helmet on, you have the chance to absorb those carcinogens through your head.
Gavin, can you explain?
Oh, sorry.
Can I go to Gavin real quick, and then I'll go back to Bobby? Because you mentioned it, and I'm real interested in this, and I think our listeners too. You said that you were actually seeing chemicals in the respirations, the blood, the urine, from the fire. Could you explain what chemicals you were seeing? And then we'll go to kick it to Bobby Hall.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that were being measured during the study. So looking at what is being metabolized in the body and in the urine. So we're measuring for markers that there had been some level of exposure. And I'm just trying to make sure I get the numbers right. So compared to levels before the firefighting activities began, in this we were looking at about 10 to 12 minutes worth of activity in a small one-room fire. So wearing full PPE with SCBA, everything was on. And we were measuring gas concentrations in the air, looking at breath concentrations of benzene, toluene, and styrene. And again, wearing all of the gear with hood SCBA throughout, made sure we didn't have any environmental contamination. They wore SCBA to and from the burns. A twofold increase in the breath concentration after the burns compared to before the burns. Now, there is also one other way that, in a paper that just came out earlier this month with Kenny Fent as the lead author, and it's in the Journal of Environmental and Occupational Hygiene, looking at the off-gassing. So this is one of the other things we really got to keep an eye on, is the gear protects us by basically being a block. Same thing, it stops the heat from getting us, and our skin temperature doesn't rise because the temperature of the gear rises and it protects us. Same thing in terms of keeping the carcinogens or the gases off of our skin. It absorbs into the PP itself. But part of the study, what we did is we took some of that gear and put it into a container and then measured what was off-gassing from the gear and looked at before and after the fire. And again, for one relatively small fire, we saw a 5-fold increase in off-gassing concentration again of styrene, benzene, dichlorobenzene, acetone, cyclohexane, all of these components that were in a very small fire. And these fires were basically one chair, a table, and small electronics. So a more than 5-fold increase just from a roughly 10-minute exposure to some of these gases, and those are some of the same things that we were seeing in the breath of the firefighter. So now you think about where you're going to put that gear, all that equipment. Now, how often do we take that, throw it back into the rig, shut the doors on the apparatus, and then wait until we get done with our overhaul, our cleanup, putting the rig back in service, and ride back to the station with that? So we're now breathing all that in without any sort of respiratory protection.
You know, Gavin, you made a couple of great points, and just to chime in real quick, this conversation is blowing up Twitter. I mean, just my Twitter is just, it's blowing up. It's like 5 emails a second coming across here. So a couple of things that came across, and I'd like Gavin to speak to it, and from a couple of folks. Absorption rates. So keep that in the back. Jot that one down, Gavin. As absorption rates, like we're talking about decom, we're talking about washing up after a fire. You know, a lot of folks are saying, you know, the damage is already done. Some of this stuff is almost absorbed instantaneously. Some of them are saying, you know, it's too late. The other thing that came across, a lot of people are chiming in on the hydrogen cyanide issue, and I would just throw this out there. If one of your firefighters breathes any smoke at all, get the cyanide kit. To the best of my understanding, and some of the paramedics out there may have better understanding today, but when I was trained, the cyanide kit that's currently out there has no contraindications. So the worst possible side effect you're going to have is if you take too much of it, you're going to look Italian like Ricci. It's going to change your skin color a little bit. But other than that, it's a totally benign a product. But what it can do is it's the antidote to hydrogen cyanide poisoning. So I don't know, Gavin, if you could chime in on that, but if you could speak real quickly to absorption rates and some of the different products that are out there and some of the different dangers we have, and then if you could talk a little bit about cyanide in specific as to what your studies are doing and what you're looking at. And as I understood it also, Gavin, and correct me if I'm giving people bad information, you know, correct me, but I heard that the half-life on hydrogen cyanide in our blood is very hard to detect, but that the cardiotoxic effects of it can last up to 72 hours. And that's what I've been taught.
Right. Well, I don't think you've ever given anyone bad information, but I'll let you know what I know. And again, we have experts such as Denise Smith and other folks who are really focusing on some of the cardiotoxic effects. So I might punt a little bit on that question right there. But to go back to some of the comments that were brought up, absorption rates. We know that the absorptivity of the skin changes, particularly as it gets warmer, right? So pores open up and other things. There has been a great deal of work, and some people say up to 400% increase in terms of the absorptivity of the skin, which can affect some of the risks. The skin provide a great barrier, a very effective barrier to some of these toxins. One of the aspects of the study that we're going to look at is skin temperature patches, in addition to core temperature, which we've always measured. What is the skin temperature on the neck and on the arm under different parts of the our PPE? And then Kenny and the team from NIOSH are going to take swipes from the skin in that area, so we can look at what is the exposure as well as some of the temperature effect. There's been a lot of really good laboratory-based research looking at how skin changes with temperature and absorption. Certainly, we know that the gear does protect us quite well, but it doesn't provide 100% protection. It is better than not having anything at all, most certainly, but the hood does provide fewer layers. It's not a 3-layer system like the rest of the PPE. So there are pathways or potential pathways to there, as well as the seams. So the gear cannot protect us from everything, and as soon as it gets on the skin, there certainly is opportunity for it to begin to absorb. One of the points in the outcomes from the initial NIOSH study that we ran with Kenny a couple years ago was get it off of your skin as rapidly as possible. Right? It does absorb, but the longer it stays on your skin, the more residence time you have, the more opportunity it has to be absorbed. So when we go to rehab, clean the skin off. You don't necessarily have to wait until you get a full shower. There are places where we know we're more likely to have some exposure. Clean those off as rapidly as possible. You know, this is part of rehab. This can be part of rehab. This can be done as rapidly as you possibly can. The second question was hydrogen cyanide. And I mean, this is another one of those really hot topics in the fire service. And something that we've added to the study that we're going to be looking at. We're actually going to be drawing blood and looking at exposures to hydrogen cyanide. The team from NIOSH has added a couple other measurements using some state-of-the-art instrumentation that they have to characterize really what is in the environments. Depending on who you talk to, some people say, you know, there's hydrogen cyanide at every single fire. Others say, well, others who've tried measuring it have had a hard time actually measuring it. And some of that has to do with the instrumentation, which is tricky and difficult. But getting good measurements from fireground, and this is one of the advantages of this, you know, modern fire environment that we have in terms of working with UL, we're going to be able to get some very accurate measurements, not only what is produced, but then what is the exposure to the firefighter themselves. And then we're hoping to be able to do that in the off-gassing as well. You know, how effective is decon? Not just at getting off the particulate and the soot and everything else, but some of these other materials. So that was a long answer to a couple different questions. I hope I kind of hit on the important points there.
No, Gavin, I absolutely think you did. And another report that I'd like to, put a plug out there for is Providence, Rhode Island in 2006. They had 3 fires back to back and had a member suffer a heart attack. While bringing him to the ER in his evaluation, he was found to have high levels of hydrogen cyanide. Providence did a spectacular job. They immediately recalled all 28 firefighters back. They did cyanide testing, and they found that 27 out of 28 of those firefighters, who ranged from the fire attack to search to pump operators, guys that operated on the roof, guys were inside and outside, 27 out of 28 had high levels of hydrogen cyanide. And that was back in 2006. So this data is out there, this information is out there, but we need to start doing a better job of paying attention to it and how it's truly affecting us, our families, and our brothers and sisters. So we really appreciate it. And I believe we also have Chief Costo. Have you made it on with us? I know he was there. I'm not sure if he's having a connection issue or not, but we'll...
I think I'm here now.
We could hear you, Chief. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Henry.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good, buddy.
Chief, so thank you for joining us, and just to give all these people that are viewing us today a little bit about you. Chief, you're a 39-year veteran of the Philadelphia Fire Department. You're also the Deputy Commissioner of Technical Services. You have a long, outstanding history in the fire service, and you've done some amazing things as far as research and bringing that research all the way down to the fire service. I know we spoke on the phone a couple weeks ago. We talked about specifically the NIOSH cancer study that you had a significant involvement in. The study that started with, you hope to only have 18,000 firefighters, and in the end, you had up to 30,000 firefighters. So you've done some amazing things to help us. You had an amazing career, and also now helping us with cancer and how it's affecting us, our brothers and sisters. So thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. I'm sorry I missed as much as I did. There were delays getting here, and then there were some technical issues. So I was finally able to overcome them. So here I am. But I don't want to repeat anything that I was listening in as Gavin was speaking. He was doing a pretty eloquent job describing some of those things. So I don't know where you are and what you'd like to know from me.
Chief, I'd like to kind of look at, have you speak as far as your involvement in the NIOSH cancer study, on how that was came to light within the Philadelphia Fire Department, but also what did you find, and what are your recommendations, or what are the recommendations in the report that we, as current fire service professionals today, can do to impact or decrease our chances of attracting cancer in the future?
Well, that's actually a multifaceted question. The involving it would be a case study just in terms of educating all of us on being persistent with something like this, because I tell you what, it was not an easy task to get any of the metro departments involved, and we actually at one point were hoping to have as many as 40,000 people as part of the cohort that was studied, but unfortunately the change in leadership in Washington, D.C. Resulted in their removal from, they were basically recused themselves. To my attention, from an anecdotal perspective, was, you mentioned 39, it's actually 40 and a half, so that information was a little bit dated, but virtually every single firefighter who was assigned to the station, my initial assignment in the PFD, is no longer with us. Were all as a result of cancers, various types. Obviously, the history was such that we weren't wearing the SCBAs, we weren't doing the things, we didn't have turnout gear, there was no such thing as cleaning and repairing it, let alone having a level of protection that we have today. Also, there was a huge issue with diesel emissions in the station. We had open watch desks. So there were a lot of exposures that were a byproduct of the actual apparatus and vehicles that we were utilizing. One of the things that I would say, your question about learning and what we can do going forward, the study that we did, which basically covered firefighters from 1950 to 2009, and that involved the cities of Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco, without getting into the history of our involvement, which was a somewhat difficult path to navigate, as I mentioned. There were a couple of things that were learned, and it begged as many questions as it answered. I think everybody's familiar with the fact that NIOSH's involvement was actually brought about, their continued involvement, at least in this case, as a result of the National League of Cities and their objection to the study that kind of predated their involvement, and then they did a study, they basically authorized a rebuttal study, and one of their recommendations was that NIOSH, they didn't recommend NIOSH per se, they recommended that a scientific, internationally recognized organization without an agenda, or at least an apparent agenda, get involved. So that was how they got involved, and with Philadelphia and other cities as well. Clearly an association. There are some things that it suggests, as we obviously the cohort did not include a lot of females, and their involvement came at the tail end of that time frame that I mentioned. And there has been, albeit with a limited sample, there is a manifestation that there's an increased level of breast cancer. There are other cancers that there's a clear association that's been identified as well. One of the things that came out of it was this, regarding to, and Gavin, you may have spoken to this subject earlier, regarding our practices with regards to overhaul. In the past, the model was pretty effective, and it was, as the fire was knocked down, the smoldering byproducts were somewhat less than onerous, given the fact that they were byproducts of the typical wood, paper, natural fiber type fires. Well, that's not the case anymore, and it's counterintuitive, but it's actually the worst time for us to be removing our SCBAs during this fire actually are occurring after we have knocked the fire down. It was now those things that were being incinerated, those byproducts that tend to be carcinogenic, that were being incinerated during the fire, are now actually resulting in large particulates and accumulating carcinogens because they're not being incinerated, given the fact that today's fires do not involve those kind of natural, more artificial, petroleum-based fuels. So that was one of the things that we came up with. NIOSH had agreed that we were, and it's based upon funding availability, we were going to have firefighters at Philadelphia, a select group, where monitoring devices during the overhaul process to actually identify and establish where we were in terms of accumulating debris and toxins on our turnouts. So that was one of the things that was suggested. Another thing, which is very basic and very fundamental, and I wish that I had done it when I first became a firefighter. One of the problems with the NIOSH study was establishing the level of exposure for a given firefighter. There is a certain assumption or presumption that in a large metropolitan department, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, that the level of exposure would be significant. But it's not the same for every firefighter within those various departments. Obviously, some firefighters spend an awful lot of time in busy firehouses. Some find themselves in staff over those years. So a lot of our time was spent trying to identify the degree or level of exposure that an individual would have. And that's somewhat problematic, even if you're going back through personnel records, which is what we did in Philadelphia. What I would suggest to a new firefighter is that they document every single response, every single possible potential exposure that they have throughout their career. It's something that I wish I had done, and it's not obviously not going to be a scientific recording, but it would give you some level and some indicator of a level and degree and types of exposure that you've had throughout your career. And it would be independent of relying upon department's HR or division or unit, and it would be something that you would be able to track. And it would have been fantastic information for us within this study. So in conjunction, kind of parallel paths was involved, and I think Gavin was referring to some studies as well, with some studies regarding the accumulated, chronic accumulations of contaminants. We tend to look at those cyanides, and we look at those PCB exposures, or known as asbestos exposures. Those are acute exposures that we kind of do a pretty decent job of tracking. What we don't do is, and this goes back to what I said about recording all of your exposures, all of the fires to which you respond, etc. We don't do a real good job of tracking those chronic exposures. So one of the things we were doing was working with University of Kentucky, Line Apparel, and some others. We're basically trying to identify, other than the usual suspects, some of the contaminants that are accumulating on our gear, as well as getting a handle on the efficacy or lack thereof of the cleaning and repair process. And then looking at that from two levels. One is what the minimums that are prescribed by 1851, and then also going to what processes we used in Philadelphia, which somewhat were above what were the minimum requirements. So we were actually going in excess and trying to identify what the cleaning and repair, whether or not it was actually working, the cleaning. We had the funding to identify some of the contaminants, and there were some things that were somewhat disconcerting in that regard. Particularly, most of the studies that I've seen so far tend to focus on the outer shell and some other areas of the gear, and haven't looked very closely at the wristlets in the gear, the gloves, the wrist portion of the gloves, and the hoods. And one of the first things we did just to get a sampling was looking at our hoods, and we found some concerning levels of heavy metals that were actually accumulating on the hoods. And many departments, including our own for some time, we didn't even include cleaning the hoods as part of our overall cleaning process. So I hope I wasn't rambling. I think I was, but I'm trying to hit as many things as I can in the short time that we had left because of my late arrival.
Chief, we really thank you for coming on. Unfortunately, your connection keeps going in and out, but I think the content and what you're saying is so important. So I'm going to pass it to Gavin. We talked about the gear off-gassing, and the chief so eloquently said, you know, about the hood exposure and cleaning the gear. Has there been any work done on when a firefighter in a city is getting detailed from firehouse to firehouse, or a volunteer out there that keeps their gear in their car? Has there been any study or research done? What impact does it have when the gear is placed in a gear bag? Is that technology that we need to look at doing a better job so that the gear is kind of contained in the bag? Have we studied that? Has anybody even looked at that? Because I think that that's a problem in most of the cities. Everybody's getting detailed around, and volunteers are also putting their gear in their car.
You bring up a great point. I am not aware of any research that has looked at the effect or how well a bag can contain the off-gassing. There's not a whole lot of information out there about the off-gassing, the magnitudes that we would expect to see. So some of the work that, again, we do with Kenny Fent from NIOSH, as well as some really good work down at Queensland Fire Service, Queensland Fire Rescue Service, has looked at some of this off-gassing, but I've not seen anything to this point focusing on how that can be contained in design of gear bags. But you bring up an excellent point. What we're trying to do right now, and really to give you an idea of where we're at, we're just trying to understand the magnitude of the problem. You know, what Chief just described here from the studies that NIOSH ran, we're able, I should say, they were able to finally establish a causal relationship for some of these cancers, which is a very difficult statistical process to go through in order to put the clear link between the two. And I think the Daniels articles has done that. What we're trying to do is understand, you know, what are the possible mechanisms? What are the ways that we might be exposing ourselves and potentially family members? And then the next step, once we find those, what are the interventions? What can we do? And your example is an outstanding way that we might be able to reduce some of these exposures. You know, gear bag manufacturer that can provide some level of containment within a bag in terms of moving it back and forth. As you mentioned, you know, it's obviously a problem for a lot of the volunteer departments who keep the gear in their personal vehicles, but as well as the transfers and moving back and forth. These are some of the policies, you know, going back to our initial discussion, a lot of this is leadership. So how does leadership help support the firefighters so that they don't have to have the gear in their personal vehicles, whether it's through a bag or some other process where that gear gets transferred to the different departments outside of a personal vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, the solution is not just better PPE, not just more protection, because we got to look at it from a holistic perspective. But how can we provide some of these operating procedures? How can we provide the manpower so that when you're doing the firefight, you don't have to go into overhaul after going through 2 cylinders of air, so you're so tired firefighters don't want to stay on air? Or how can you have enough manpower there during the overhaul, identifying that if you're on air in full gear, you're going to be tired, you're going to be hot. Those are exposures from a thermal perspective that we have to consider as well, and how do we help our firefighters to be able to then go to rehab, to clean up, to get those contaminants that might get through the gear and onto their skin. How do we get that cleaned off? Instead of waiting for 2 cylinders in rehab, after that first exposure, get out and get it off of the skin as rapidly as possible. There's a lot of potential solutions, and not all of them are really expensive solutions. But you hit one great idea that would be very interesting to look into.
You know, Gavin, I think those are great points. It's a great point that Frank brought up. Something that you said there, which is key, is it comes down to leadership. It comes down to leadership both locally but also nationally. I think we need to get out the message to our local leaders in the fire service, you know, our chief officers, that they need to really truly fight for us for all firefighters to have 2 sets of turnout gear. So every firefighter in America has 2 sets of turnout gear, so we have that opportunity to decontaminate the gear. But that requires leadership for them to truly step up and fight the politicians and get more funding. And I also think it goes bigger than that. I think we need to really look at grassroots efforts to have national cancer presumption laws for all firefighters, regardless of career or volunteer. If you're a firefighter today, we should be covered under presumption laws. And then I think the other piece is also screening. Physicals, yearly physicals, annual physicals that include cancer screening tests, not just the, bring occupational health, bend over, touch your toes, do a little spirometry, read this eye chart, let's listen to your heart. Oh, you're okay to be a firefighter for this next year because you're nice and healthy. I think we really need to start pushing for greater physicals that meet the NFPA standard that includes some cancer screening for all of our firefighters.
May I,
Bobby,
may I jump in here?
quickly, because you keep coming in and out, Chief, and that's the one problem that we're having with your connection.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. You mentioned leadership. I'm going to say it also requires fellowship. You touched on a couple of points. We did get in Philadelphia 2 sets of gear for every single firefighter. So from that perspective of having the policymakers, the people with the finances, provide us with those 2 sets, that's there. The leadership there was to create a cleaning and repair program that required every set of gear to be inspected and cleaned, advanced cleaning and inspection annually. But then we have firefighters who want to hide the dirty set of gear because their identity as a firefighter is somehow linked to the dirty gear. So there's the fellowship part of it. But part of that is training. You need to get people, and that was one of the reasons why I was so adamant about us being involved in the study. If you can tell firefighters, you can tell people not to smoke, but when you can demonstrate through statistics how dangerous it is, it makes the case more compelling. And similarly with the turnout gear and cleaning of it, I was hoping that the various studies which we were participating would galvanize people, get them to understand that we weren't just telling them that it was important to be to clean, have their gear clean, but we were demonstrating why and doing that statistically and with data. And that's the fellowship and leadership part of it, getting our people to understand so that they do it out of enlightened compliance, not because they're being forced to have their gear clean.
Chief, I think that's very well said, and it definitely comes down to leadership and following. One thing that I'm a true believer in, because I know that all firefighters want to look cool, is I'm a big proponent of black gear, because when they have black gear, they tend not to mind to wash it. So it's something out there. I'm going to pass this to Bobby Halton.
Well, I just some outstanding comments and just a million. I apologize to everybody on Twitter. I got hit with about 500, questions. Obviously, we can take this topic and get Gavin back on. I'd love to get Denise back on. Maybe after FDIC, we can get the 2 of you back on together, and we can, talk about what we discover. Obviously, it's a problem of tremendous dimensions, as Gavin so eloquently and Henry so eloquently have described. It's not just deconning at the fire scene. A few years ago we discussed maybe creating an exclusionary zone on the fire ground, much like a collapse zone, to where we're completely out of all the smoke. There's no benign smoke. We know that. There's no innocuous smoke. P.J. referenced the Kirk Verone's guys, the Providence guys. Several of those people one of the people who went down, who actually collapsed on the scene from cyanide toxicity, was the pump operator, who was a good 40, 50, 60 feet away from the building. I don't know exactly where he was. So the problem has incredible dimensions, but it also has incredible dimensions into the general public as well, who we swore to protect and serve. We're a very interesting group of people, sometimes almost narcissistic. We forget that the very people we're swore to protect are sleeping on those mattresses that are now off-gassing so many toxins that children can't sleep on California-approved fireproof mattresses. We forget that quantitative decomposition, which is the off-gassing of all these open-cell foams and these polymer products, are happening in offices and homes across the country, and the people we swore to protect are being exposed to it. So we need to get the word out. This toxicity is not just a firefighter's issue, it's an issue for the general population and may explain why a lot of these cancers are growing just in the general population. That being said, I think we need to support some of the organizations that are helping to support us, in particular the two firefighter organizations. The Firefighter Cancer Support Network, Tuesday night at FDIC. If you're coming, please support the Cancer Support Network's Comedy Night. It helps raise funds for the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. If you're not a member, you know, if you haven't had cancer in your life, you don't have to have had cancer in your life to be a member. You can join and help support your fellow firefighters who are struggling with cancer. And if you have cancer, get a hold of us. We'll send you a packet. We'll send you a kit. We'll connect you with somebody who's had your cancer. Cancer doesn't have to kill you. Early detection is the key. And I think that that's something I would rather push for than all these other federal. And I'm a libertarian, so as Henry and my other good friends know about me, I'm not a big fan of federal anything. But I think on the local level, we should be screening constantly for all kinds of health issues, including cancer. Also, my friends at the Firefighter Cancer Foundation, Cindy L. and my good friend Jim Feith, and my friends out of Detroit, support them. Support all the foundations. And finally, one of the things to remember when we talk about this, and I learned this from my son, who's absolutely brilliant, and his friend Dan Ariely, who's written some great books. Dan wrote a couple of great books. He's the head of the Behavioral Research Economics Division at Duke University. Rather than telling people about being part of the 15 or 20% of firefighters who get cancer and have to deal with cancer, let's talk about the 85%. Let's be part of the 85% or the 75% who don't get cancer. In other words, people want to belong to the in group, not the out group. And they discovered it by doing a study of people picking up petrified wood in the national forest. They said 3% of people steal petrified wood, and they used that as their ad campaign. And people kept stealing it. It got worse. When they said 97% of people don't, it got better because people want to belong to the in group. So when we're doing our messaging as firefighters, let's talk about the fact that 85% of us or 75%, whatever it is, don't get cancer, don't have heart attacks, are in shape. Let's talk about the in group, and that'll help have a smaller out group. But I want to thank Gavin and Henry. Brilliant stuff. P.J. and Frank, thank you for letting me join you on your show. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Can't wait to see you all at FDIC. Remember, next week we have another Humpday Hangout. Well, you guys can, before you close up, but I want to let everybody know there's a special Humpday Hangout going to be happening on Tuesday the 14th. We're going to be talking about a pre-FDIC show. Ray McCormick, Steve Kerber, an all-star cast of folks, Frank and P.J. Hopefully you can call in too, but an all-star cast of pre-FDIC stuff. So hope to see you all there, and thank you for having me.
I want to leave off. We're at the 2 o'clock witching hour, and I want to thank Henry and Gavin for calling in, and I want to invite both of them to continue this conversation on politics and tactics on March 30th. And hopefully, Chief, it's such an honor to have you on and all the hard work and, you know, politics that I'm talking about the other Chief, Bobby Hall, and not you. I'm talking about this Chief, the Deputy Commissioner. He's had some political struggles for firefighter safety, as Chief Halton has as well. But we'd love to hear about it on politics and tactics. And I was really disappointed that your connection wasn't good today, but your information was great. Remember, if you want to be with the in crowd, go to FDIC this year. We look forward to seeing all of you. And every time I go there, I always learn more than I give to the students. So we really appreciate it. And that's the last word for today. And thanks for coming on Fire Engineering's Humpday Hangout.
Thank you.